You're unemployed, you're angry, you're depressed, and something isn't working in your life. So you hear about Zen, which promises you freedom. Freedom. You say, well, yeah, I'm going to sign up for that. And then you come here and you're sitting on your cushion. You say, I'm not sure what I signed up for anymore. This feels like a prison. When does the liberation happen? So we have to start somehow, and it helps if you start where you are, not where you think you should be or where you want to be or where you'd like to be, but where you are. And where you are might be irritable and grumpy, angry, tired, stressed out, anxious, might be happy. Start where you are. So it's natural to come here expecting to get rid of your suffering. I mean, who wants to suffer? And Zen holds out this promise of being liberated from suffering. So you come here and you want to get rid of your suffering and the problems that you have. But if you think getting rid of your negativity will solve your problems, you don't understand your problems and you don't understand negativity. It's that which you want to get rid of that you require to be free. This is not a practice about being perfect. Take it from me. I've been practicing this over 50 years. I've been teaching over 30 years, but ask anyone that knows me and see if they'll tell you I'm perfect. Ask my wife. She'll tell you. I'm still not perfect. Far from it. So accepting ourselves as we are is to accept that we're imperfect. Once you're okay with that, then maybe you can accept something about yourself and begin to see that, with some humor perhaps, that you could love your imperfect self. So I'm going to give 2 talks during this retreat, a talk today and a talk tomorrow. I'm going to use a verse from Dogen Zenji in the Shobo Genzo and the Fasil called the Genjo Koan. And it's a very famous quote from Dogen where he says, "To study Buddhism is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by all things. This traceless enlightenment continues forever." Now, we don't have a lot of time together. We'll just be able to cover the first 2 lines. And if we can get the first 2 lines, if we can really be clear about that, we've got something. That's a lot. So first, we begin practice by studying the self. We begin practice with some curiosity about this self, me, my thoughts, my emotions, my opinions, my judgments. You think you're going to get free of your judgments? I once tried to count how many judgments I had in 1 hour and I gave up. You have to have one of those clickers, you know. So how do we study the self? Well, we study our experience, and we do a meditation practice because it helps us begin to see what we're actually doing moment by moment. And one of the first discoveries you may make that is, and it's really disconcerting, is how busy your mind is. Thinking, plotting, planning, worrying. How did I end up here in this place? It's so beautiful outside. I'm here in this prison. I didn't sign up for this. So let's start with some what would be traditional preliminaries in the Buddhist tradition. And there's 4. First one is that human life is precious and rare. Do not squander it. To be born as a human being, to be alive right now, in this moment, in this time, it's extraordinary that we're all here, alive, breathing. What a gift. Sometimes it doesn't feel like a gift. Sometimes it just feels like a burden. But still, even with a burden, we're still alive. What a gift. And it's precious. And the second preliminary is you will die someday. And you don't know when it's going to happen. And I'm going to die too. You're going to die. The person you're talking to is going to die. We're all going to die. It's bad news. We don't want to talk about that. We'd rather talk about something else, anything else. And you don't know when you're going to die. Think of all the people you have already lost in your life that are gone. And as you get older, you'll lose more. More people fading into photographs. The third preliminary is what you do matters. You are bound by the law of karma, of cause and effect, and thinking that you can make shortcuts there is just not being clear. Thinking that you can make shortcuts in your life and that you won't pay the consequences for those, it's just not being clear about your life. Personal integrity matters. How you behave matters. And, you know, it's easy to be cynical. The world we're living in is it can seem very dark. And there's a lot of disruption and chaos. So it's hard to see. It's hard to see that still what you do matters. Who you are matters. Who you are matters to your children. Who you are matters to your spouse. Who you are matters to your parents and your siblings and your neighbors and everyone else. The fourth preliminary is that suffering is the first noble truth. It's noble because it's true. We all suffer, and we have to come to terms with this one way or another. It's part of examining what it is to be a self, to be who we are. It's part of our human condition. The Buddha looked around and saw the world as it was, and he named it suffering. And it's noble because it's just the way it is. You can say that's such a grim thing to be talking about, suffering and death. You're just talking about reality. So, to study yourself, this is a good way to study yourself, to sit still long enough to actually see what you're doing. And what we normally do in our lives is we're very busy. We do all kinds of things. We go to work, we raise kids, we send them to school, we take out the garbage, we cook in the kitchen, and we have all kinds of routines and entertainment and diversions, and we don't really look and inquire clearly about who we are and how we're doing what the heck we're doing. So it is useful to begin this practice with a clear intention. And I want to invite you to really consider this seriously. What is your intention? What is your aspiration? It's not the same thing as what your goal is or what you what is most important to you? Why did you come here? There's no right answer, no wrong answer, but why are you here? What's important to you? What do you value the most when everything else is stripped away? When you've got nothing left in your life, what is the most important thing that you still want to have? What is it? So someone might say, although I don't think many people really have this aspiration, I want to see what's real. I want to see what's true. I don't think people really have an aspiration to see reality because, I don't know, it's just not something you hear people talking about much. Yeah, I want to see reality. Aspiration is important. It's important because your life tends to unfold along the lines of what you value most. If you value gambling, then you'll end up in Las Vegas. If you value compassion and trying to figure out who you are, you'll end up at a retreat like this. Your intention matters. It's important. Why are you here? Sometimes we have conflicting values. It can be confusing. We have internal, external conflicts. And the second thing that I think is really important is to have a strong determination to follow through on your aspiration. This spiritual path it's not so easy. It's easy to forget the Dharma. There's so many other things that we could be doing. So to have a strong determination to follow through on your aspiration because it matters, when you line those two things up, well, now you have something. Now you have something. Now you have a way forward. Still don't know what the goal is, but at least you have a clear path forward in terms of a practice. And this afternoon, when you're sitting on your cushion or your chair and you're feeling tired and grumpy, you keep going. What we love is reflected in what we do. I would say that people that stick around for this practice love the truth in some way, which means that we have to be brutally honest with ourselves to be truthful. And that's hard to do. We easily make excuses for ourselves, easily deceive ourselves in all kinds of ways. Let's say the third thing that's important is to be very clear that you're the boss. Don't forfeit your authority to anybody. To teachers, to Zen masters, to priests, politicians, kings, princes. Don't give your power away to anybody. You might think that blindly following some enlightened person is going to somehow rub off on you. I don't think so. You have to do this yourself. And you have to own what you do, both good and bad. You have to own it. And that takes courage because, I don't know, it's hard to, one way we speak about this is to really own what you do is to eat your projection. That is not a diet we are fond of. We create a world through our projections, through our senses, that separates us from that world. And in being separated and agreeing with the conventional wisdom that this is real, the world is made up of things, creates all the suffering, all the push and pull and the war and the turmoil and the misery of trying to get it, or get more, or have less, always struggling with things. And if you're a thing, then there's enormous fear about dying, fear about being alone and not belonging, not really belonging in this world, being a stranger, being alienated. We have got to be the most lonely culture on the planet, America. You're the boss. So if you're the boss, that means the buck stops there, stops with you. Can't make any excuses for yourself. It's really tough. The fourth thing I would say that is very helpful in starting this practice is to be yourself. Now that's not so easy to figure out how to really be ourselves, to be genuine, to be sincere. To trust your own experience as it is. So this path can be, often is a descent into chaos, a descent into shadows and darkness and fear. And if you ascend too early, it usually doesn't work psychologically. We have to do the work of being ourselves. And that means you have to have all of yourself. You can't pick and choose the parts you like and the parts you don't like. You have to have it all. But what is this self? So we start by studying the self. That's basic practice of mindfulness. And as we teach it here at this center, we start by saying we practice meditation from the inside out. That means your meditation practice starts with where you're at, with what you're experiencing, whatever it is, with your judgments, with your busy mind, with your anger, with your jealousy, with your pride, all of it. You start with that. That's your fertilizer. And then in the second class that we teach here at the Zen Center, we talk about what gets in the way of this meditation. And one of the biggest things that gets in the way of meditation from the inside out is shame. We don't feel worthy. I'm not good enough. If I really was to be myself and let you see me, it would not go well. I would be found wanting, and I would not have any friends, and no one would love me, and I would be all alone in the world. That's shame talking. Now, you may not say it just like that. There are degrees of shame. There are degrees of the trance of unworthiness. But if there is any doctrine or belief in our Zen practice, I think the most important one, and I hope you will take this in, is that you are unconditionally worthy. You're not worthy when you're not worthy when you do something. You're already worthy, just as you are, with all your warts and neuroses and messed upness. You're just the way you are. You're unconditionally worthy. You are intrinsically awake and basically good and basically sane. And practice starts here. It has to start here with loving kindness, with kindness to yourself, maybe a little humor too thrown in to make it bearable, because it can be it might be dark. You might be desperate. You might be bored. You might be depressed. This is where you begin. And the beautiful thing about this practice is actually, if you do it, if you take a posture and you sit upright in the way that we teach it, you sit in a chair, you sit cross-legged, or you sit in seiza on your knees, and you are brave enough to come to a retreat like this and sit through this and be with yourself through all of it, the ups and downs, then you will start to find some clarity about yourself. And you will see all the ways that you get in the way of yourself too, of being yourself. All the judgments, all just the fierce inner critic that follows you around, that doesn't give you any peace of mind whatsoever. So how do we do this practice? How do we study the self? Well, we sit ourselves down long enough, as we're doing here, to start to be able to see what we're doing moment by moment. And when your mind is very speedy, you have lots of thoughts going around, it's hard to see what you're actually doing in the present because you're speeding. Your mind is going too fast. And so you need some kind of discipline, such as meditation, that can help you cut through that speed and actually start to see what you're really doing moment by moment. Breathing, walking, standing up, eating a meal, whatever you're doing. You know how that is, right? If you're like depressed and you're not feeling well and you're standing in front of a beautiful sunrise, you don't even see it. You don't even see it. So much of the time we're missing the opportunity to actually be here, to be awake, to be free. So the word sesshin, that is the Japanese word for retreat, is two characters. It's setsu shin. And setsu means to unify. And shin means heart-mind. So what we are doing in the beginning meditation practice is we are unifying our heart and mind and our body. We are becoming embodied. Meditation isn't just a mental exercise, it's, you've probably starting to realize, is that it's very physical. You thought, oh, I'm just going to come and, well, it's going to be a breeze. I'm going to sit, it'll be so peaceful and lovely. And no, it's not always like that. It's physical, and your legs hurt, and you get irritated, and your body doesn't want to sit still. You feel like you're in prison. How did I end up here? So when you keep sitting with determination and a strong intention, you begin to notice, you actually are starting to come back into your body, to come home to your direct experience. Not what you think it is, but what it actually is before you think about it. It's very hard to trust that direct experience. So we have the beginning practice that we teach here is that's very common in our tradition, is called shamatha, mindfulness meditation, one pointed attention. You start by counting the out breath. Each out breath till you get to 10, and then you start over. That's the beginning practice. And if you're not bored, you're probably not doing it right. Okay? If you're bored, good. You're making progress. Count to 10, start over. Count to 10, start over. Oh, what happens if I don't get to 10? Start over. So you don't get to 10, right? I'm not going to get to 10. You get to 3, and then you're off and running, right? Your mind it does this. And then, so the point is not to get to 10. The point is actually, when you're off and running and you've lost the count, at some point, because you're doing this with intention, because you've set a kind of a container for your practice of some aspiration that you're actually trying to pay attention, you notice that you're not counting anymore. And then you come back to the count, and you use the count as a device, just a device to help you be present, like counting sheep, except that then you go to sleep. So count to 10 instead. Count to 10. And then you space out, and it's not about getting to 10, it's about coming back. How many times are you going to have to come back? Don't count, believe me. You have to have a clicker. and you come back. And each time you do that, you're short-circuiting that story that goes on, that self-preoccupation. That's running soap opera that you thought was your life, and you've discovered it's actually making you miserable. This is where we start. This is how we start to study the self. We're not thinking about the self, we're not analyzing the self, we're actually just paying attention to what we do moment by moment. And we're using the container of meditation and the schedule and practicing together like this in the retreat to harmonize and regulate the body and mind so that we can actually be here in a kind of unified manner and feel whole, feel wholesome, feel sane. So I want to say one more thing about neuroscience, because we do teach this here at our Zen Center in terms of mindfulness. And I think sometimes these teachings about the brain and neuroscience are very empowering because it's a way of studying the self. We all have a brain, right? That's a good thing. It's still a good thing, even if it leads us astray. So trying to understand a little bit about how our brains work is just a marvelous thing, and they're very complicated. But one of the things we know about the brain is there's something called the default mode network. Somewhere along here in the middle of your brain. And what they discovered, the scientists discovered, is that this part of our brain is active when we're doing nothing. Very active. And it basically has to do with thoughts about me, mine, and myself, and I. Can you relate to this? That voice in your head? That's a default mode network doing its thing, doing exactly what your brain was designed to do, to think about me, mine, I, myself. Boy, that's fun. That can be seductive. We all know about that voice in the head. Now, it's interesting because they were surprised to discover that this actually part of our brain is active when we're not doing anything. You know, and when you start doing a task, it starts to dampen down. So if you're meditating and counting the breath and stuff, you're starting to dampen it down a little bit because you're cutting, right? You're counting the breath and you're cutting off that little story that's going on there. You actually, now, because you have intention, a hand comes down and just cuts that thing in half, short circuits the whole thing. So it can't really get going. It can't work up a head of steam, you know, enough to have a good drama. People, if you do like mountain climbing, you know, or rock climbing, and your life is at risk, your default mode network is not going on when you're climbing up that rock, because you're, you know, and maybe that's why people do rock climbing, so they at least have some relief from that voice in their head for the time that they're on the rock. Now, what happens if you go with the voice in your head and you don't want to count your breath and you don't have an intention to look at yourself with try to be clear about what you're doing, that voice in your head just gets more and more solidified, and you become what you might call a solo self. In other words, that part of your brain doesn't really integrate with the other parts of your brain very well. It becomes more isolated, and you become isolated with it. This is a recipe for suffering. Oh, we're so lonely. We're so lonely. So, when you count your breathing. You are starting to short circuit that part of the brain so that other parts of your brain can start to integrate with who you are. And you can use other parts of your brain that allow you to be empathic or reflective or receptive or focused on a task. So you are not the voice in your head. That is not who you are. You are the one who hears the voice in your head. And that's what we're here to investigate. That's what we're here to find out about, is ourselves. Who are we? Why are we here? How did we get here? What are we doing here? What's the meaning of my life? What's the purpose? Why am I living? What am I living for? That voice in your head isn't gonna help you very much. I often kind of joke about this. If you externalize that voice in your head and you put it over here and call it your life coach, and you listen to the advice that that voice gives you, you're going to say, man, that is really bad advice. First of all, it's contradictory. You tell me one thing one moment and another thing the next day. You're a terrible life coach. You're fired. Fire that life coach. Not helping you. But it's not so easy to do, is it? Because that's a very strong habit we all have. And so if we're going to address that habit and begin to discover something rich about who we actually are, you're going to have to sit down and be still with yourself long enough to own that voice and hear it over and get totally sick of that voice in your head. And it's going to be there, and then it's not, and then it's going to be there, and you're going to have glimpses of moments where you're not in prison, just glimpses. And if you keep doing a practice like meditation, you begin to integrate that part of your brain with other parts, and you don't become you're no longer a solo self. Do you understand what I'm saying? You actually have a capacity for much more richness of who you are. Your heart and your empathy and your compassion and your kindness, that's all there. And your sanity. But that voice in your head, it's just going to lead you astray. So and it's kind of ironic that to say, to study the self is not to listen to that voice. To actually study to be who you are, your true self, your awakened self, is to get past that voice in your head. And that's where we have to start. And it's hard work. There's no easy way to do this. You can't, I wish there was a pill you could take and then we would all be enlightened instantly. Haven't found any yet. Although during my hip operation, I was on some narcotics. Those were pretty good. So here we are. We're in a retreat. We have you have an opportunity to learn something that you won't always have. And I encourage you to take this opportunity to do this practice, knuckle under, turn off your cell phone, turn it off for the rest of the retreat. Don't look at it. I have to look at it because it's how I tell time and stuff, and I have to do some business. Turn it off. Turn it off. Be willing to be bored. Be willing to just be with yourself and find out what you're actually doing without reaching for the nearest shiny object to distract you. That takes courage. That takes some aspiration. That takes determination. You don't do this practice haphazardly. You do it because there's something worth doing it for that you value. And that's the prize you keep your eye on. That's what's important. So we could have a little, this is your chance to talk. So if you have questions, we could have a little discussion about this. Anything that's coming up about the retreat or the service we did this morning, or anything I've said here, or questions about meditation, your meditation practice, is a good time to try to clarify anything that's not clear. So Roshi Jun's going to pass the microphone to you and use the thing if you have a question.
Is this one working? Can you hear me? Okay.
Okay. Any questions?
I say easier.
Speak up.
Yeah. Oh, I thought you meant stand up. I think it's easier for me to maintain mindfulness when I'm sitting down quietly. This morning, vacuuming, sweeping, when I'm active, it's a lot more difficult to maintain that mindfulness, and I see myself drift off, more difficult to come back. Do you have any tactics, strategies, anything I should think about while I'm more active and still trying to maintain that mindfulness?
Okay, so the way we do Samu, that's a good question, actually, because when you get active, you could, it's easy to get distracted. The idea of Samu work practice is you're actually trying to be one with whatever you're doing. So actually it's working against, and it may be hard to do sometimes, but the idea is you have an intention, like you're given a job to sweep the front sidewalk. So then the idea is, not the idea, the practice is you just sweep. And you're not sweeping to get the job done, you're just sweeping. So the distance between you and what you're doing gets to be less, to the point where there's no separation, and now you're intimate with what you're doing. You're doing just one thing at a time. And there's quite a bit of, there's evidence in neuroscience as well that when we are one with, we multitask all the time in our daily lives. We don't really multitask, we just do many things fast in sequence, right? Which is not very calming and not very, so what we know from some studies that have been done is that when you do one thing at a time, without allowing yourself to be as easily distracted, it's actually quite pleasing, even if it's work. And that's a practice. So that's one of the reasons we do Samu here, is to learn how to enjoy work. It's often manual work, so it doesn't have to, a lot of times we have to do mental work in the world, or complicated things, but in the context of a retreat like this, we're just learning to be simple with what we're doing. And it may be hard at first, but as you keep sitting, you will find that you actually can begin to do this. If you're just cleaning something, that's all you're doing. You're just cleaning it, and you just allow that activity to be one with it. Yeah. So see what happens tomorrow when you do it. Yeah.
I'm not sure how to articulate my question, but we're supposed to be learning about ourselves, but yet when we're meditating, we're kind of almost turning it off, I know we're not technically turning our brains off,
Can you
but
speak up just a little bit?
Can you hear me?
I have a hard time hearing, so you.
Oh, okay.
That's for the Zoom.
Got it. Okay. So what was I saying? Oh, so we're supposed to be learning about ourselves.
Well, that'd be a good idea.
Studying ourselves, but when we're meditating, we're quieting it and we're focusing like just on counting or just on our breath. So how does that work together?
Well, you're not studying yourself in an analytical way. You're studying yourself by cutting through the speed of the stories in your head so that you can actually see what you're doing moment by moment. That may not be terribly exciting. It may be boring, but then you're learning something about yourself being bored. I think one of the things we're terrified of in this culture is to be bored, or even worse, to be a boring person. That's really the height of, right? Someone calls you a boring person, that is really the worst. That's about the worst thing someone could call you, to be boring. So I think we're terrified both of being alone without anything to reach for, without that shiny object, and to be alone and to be with whatever's here without distracting ourselves. That's what I mean by learning about yourself. You're just actually learning something that you don't learn when you reach for when you distract yourself. You're actually, I think in many cases, not all the time, but we could use these things whenever we feel uncomfortable to just reach for it and start doing the thumb thing. Whereas if we didn't reach for it, then you would actually have to be with the boredom and maybe something that's uncomfortable that's for you that you have avoided because you always have these crutches. So we can learn a lot about ourselves by being with the places that are uncomfortable for us. That's what I mean. Yeah. So you're kind of building a backbone. You're building a spiritual backbone for being with those experiences that you normally avoid. And then you're creating a window of tolerance for being with that so that you can be more balanced and integrated when that comes up in your life. If that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
When I'm meditating, usually my mind goes to everything what it's the worst, like the worst thing happened to me. My mind goes right there, right? So even if I go back to my breathing, the counting, whatever I'm trying to kind of focus back, right, back to the body, when I'm done, I still feel the darkness. I don't know how to get myself out of this. So usually it's like right after I feel worse than before. So I don't know how to kind of change this.
So is what you're saying is you kind of have like catastrophic thinking?
Like I have a lot of
Fear,
trauma in my life, right? So
yeah.
When I'm doing something, right, even if I'm trying to be mindful about it,
Yeah.
it's still when I kind of sit with myself, right?
Yeah.
It still goes right there, like right away, like the vision, like the feelings, the emotions, the whatever happens is still there. And even if I go back to my breathing, right, like I said, it's still after I'm still in the darkness. I don't know how to.
So two things. The first thing is to try to be as close as you can to your sensory awareness, your sight, your hearing, your breathing, as grounded in your body, that you're still here, feeling yourself sitting on the chair, just some kind of concrete awareness of your actual sensory awareness. And then the second thing I would say is you could work with something like that that's really pernicious by labeling it. So you label with that when it comes up, and maybe call it trauma or something more specific that's specific to you. And each time you have that, and it just is always in your face, it's always there, you label it and then come back to the breath. And what you're doing in a very small way is you're creating just a little separation from it. So instead of being in it, you're starting to watch it. The labeling gives you a way to just create a slight separation from it. So, yeah. So I think what the practice can, that's hard to do when you have this kind of trauma, really hard. So I think it also is helpful to be patient and be as kind as you can with yourself for how challenging it could be. But in general, try to bring awareness to your breath and your sensory, your sight, your hearing, and it may be helpful to say, right now I am hearing what? Right now I'm hearing cars in the street. Right now I'm hearing Roshi speaking. So you're sort of reminding yourself that you kind of coming back into your sensory awareness. Right now I can feel myself sitting on the chair. You actually say that to yourself so that you're kind of giving yourself some cues about being present. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for asking the question. It's yeah. There's a lot of trauma in our culture. So you're not alone. Yeah. Anyone else?
So intellectually, I know all this, and I've been trying to practice it for a while. And I find myself falling back into old patterns of behavior. I call it autopilot.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Any words of wisdom about how to short circuit that, get out of it, not fall into it as much?
Well, I think it's really important to start with just being kind to yourself, first of all. Is that possible? The practice isn't about being perfect in some way. It's about being real with yourself. And so you might also do labeling with that. If you have a habit that's very strong and you find it, you're doing it, you actually label it. So the labeling gives you a way to just to see it and not be in it so much. It doesn't mean you won't do it, but the labeling is a kind of way you trick yourself into watching it rather than just being lost in it. Yeah? And I think patience and kindness will see you through that. If you keep doing this practice, you'll notice that some of those things don't have the same kind of deep groove that they had before. They may still be there, but they won't have the same kind of pull on you. You have a little bit more choice in the matter. I think when you're in a habit that's strong, you don't see that you have a choice. Yeah.
So I've been reading this wonderful book by Earthlyn Manuel called Opening to Darkness. And she's a Zen priest as well, and she's giving a talk the last Sunday of this month via Zoom here. And I find what's really fascinating is this opening to darkness and how we have traditionally avoided darkness. And so, like even dark people, she's African American, right? So that's a lot of conditioning that we're also, but it seems interesting to me that the darkness, which is the trauma, how do we open to it also? Because we're talking about ways to deal with it. What about, just really honoring it? It's something that happened. There's something we have to learn from it. And it's scary because it's dark. But how do we open. And our practice here is opening to what is when we sit. You know, we're quieting down so we can see what is going on, and can we honor even what is really scary, because that is kind of the richness that is our life. So.
Well, now that we're still talking about trauma, I also think it's important that you take care of yourself. So if at any time you're at this Sun Center and you're hearing a talk by me or anybody else, and you feel triggered and overwhelmed, that you should, if you need to remove yourself from the room and go lie down on a couch, that it's okay to do that too. So I think it's important to be kind with what's going on with you, and find your own sanity in it and trust that. I know it seems far away. Closer than you know. Closer than you know.
You mentioned fertilizer.
Yeah.
I like that. That was interesting. I hadn't heard that before. Can trauma be fertilizer?
Huh?
Can trauma be fertilizer?
I think it could be. Why couldn't it be?
Wasn't sure if it is fertilizer or if it is weed killer, right? A similar instance of like, keep going, doesn't stop, right? Is there a point where maybe that's not the fertilizer we use now? You know, we use Miracle Grow instead, and then come back to that one later.
I don't want to be glib about this. I think this is not so easy to say whether it's weed killer or fertilizer. It would be useful probably to frame it as fertilizer, as something that you could would actually help you be stronger in the end. But I think it's a difficult thing, so I don't want to say anything definitive about this. I think it's up for each of us to find our way, and for us to try to support each other as we go through places that are dark and scary.
Roshi,
Yeah.
I'm reminded that I think it was the Buddha who said that the suffering is the cause of our enlightenment. Without suffering, we can't get to enlightenment. And Robert Bly, the poet, said often that we need to exit through our wounds. The key is, to someone said earlier, I know it intellectually. Well, yeah, and what I say to a friend of mine is, thank God for neuroplasticity, because I'm going to keep faking it until I make it. You know, that's just my thought on it.
You know, like I said, the thing you're trying to avoid is the thing that's going to free you. Okay, I think it's time for lunch.
Prepare for lunch.
Okay, and so put the chairs back, and I do want to ask you to remember to go back into silence as we move out of this and go into lunch, and be very careful about not talking during the breaks or any other time, and so that we hold the container and it doesn't leak. And then if we do that well together, we can keep going deeper. And tomorrow I'll give another talk on how we begin to forget the self, which is another deeper aspect of the spiritual path that we're on. Okay.